On behalf of Tennesseans Reclaiming Educational Excellence, I'd like to thank each of you for being here today. TREE is a brand new advocacy group with a mission to speak up for strong, equitable public education and child-centered education policy. Unlike many other education advocacy groups, TREE is truly grassroots. Having begun around a dining room table by a concerned group of parents, which led to a social media outreach across the state, launched just over a week ago, we, TREE, have already connected with over thousands of parents and citizens statewide to share ideas and fight for strong quality public education. As our first event, we are excited to present Dr. Elaine Weiss. Dr. Weiss holds a PhD in public policy from George Washington University and a law degree from Harvard Law School. She is a nationally recognized expert on education policy and has served as the national coordinator for the Broader, Bolder Approach to Education since 2011. The Broader, Bolder Approach to Education is a national campaign that proposes evidence-based policies to improve schools and remedy the conditions that limit many children's readiness to learn. We are honored that Dr. Weiss has come to Tennessee to shed light on how misinformation about achievement gaps is driving education policies that negatively affect Tennessee schools. Thank you for being here, Dr.
Thank you very, very much for having me. I'm delighted to be here. I'm going to immediately mess up the camera guys by probably walking around and talking to you guys more up close. It is a great moment to be here in Nashville, to be in Tennessee. As you all know, there's a lot of buzz around recent gains in NAEP scores and a lot of assertions about purported success due to race to the top. I thought it was a really important time to be here to provide some context for those claims, I think to some extent to give a reality check, and to lay a foundation for what I hope will be better, smarter, more evidence policymaking as the legislative session opens. So I want to start out by talking about NAEP. So first of all, what is NAEP? NAEP is the National Assessment of Education Progress. A lot of us know it as the nation's report card. It is a nationally provided standardized test, a high-quality standardized test, given every 2 years to 4th, 8th, and 12th graders across this country in math, reading, and science. Now, compared to a lot of other tests, NAEP is a great test. Why do I say that? NAEP provide great data for some really important reasons. First of all, as I said, NAEP is a sample test. What that means is that we never know who takes NAEP. NAEP is not attached to any specific student, not attached to any specific teacher, not attached to any specific school. As a result of that, there's no reason to game results, there's no reason to cheat on results, there's no reason to, nor is there a way to prepare for a NAEP test. Okay, so we can really trust those results. Another reason that NAEP, and I want to explain, I'm comparing NAEP to state assessments like, for example, in Tennessee, your TCAP. Okay, so NAEP results are more valid than your TCAP for these reasons. Second of all, NAEP is just a better test. NAEP is designed by nationally recognized education experts who spend a lot of time, money, and effort put into that test to make sure that it's testing in depth what kids know. So we can really trust that when we hear math, reading, and science results, we know that that's what those kids really know. That's great. Third of all, the cut scores for NAEP. NAEP cut scores are set very carefully to be consistent across time. What do I mean by cut scores? I mean that when we hear that kids are basic, they're reading at a basic level, they're doing math at a basic level, we know that over time, if we see gains in the number of kids who are reading or performing at a basic level, we can really trust that that is the case. That is not necessarily true for a test like TCAP, where cut scores are set somewhat arbitrarily and can change from year to year. Now, all of that said, there are some real limitations to NAEP, and they're the same kind of limitations that are true of any test. What are those limitations? First of all, there can be changes in who takes a test. And I'll give a very important example. In DC, where I'm from, Washington, DC, over the past few years, the kind of kids who are taking those tests, kids who are entering the school system, is different from year to year. And one of the things that we know is that kids who are coming into our school system in DC are whiter, higher income, and tend to score better on tests than they have in the past. That is one of the reasons why the test scores in DC are going up, and we know this from some analysis. So we want to keep in mind who's taking a test. It does make a difference. Second of all is, gains of any test are meaningful over a long period of time. What do I mean by that? Now, many of you all are parents, and you've probably seen that things change with kids in your house. For example, your child might be doing something one week and not doing it the next week. It takes a long time before we know whether that change is a real trend, a trend we can believe in, or something meaningless. I still remember when my daughter was 3, and she announced all of a sudden to my mother-in-law, her grandmother, "I love broccoli." So my mother-in-law went out and bought 2 pounds of broccoli. Guess what she had in her refrigerator the next week? 2 pounds of broccoli, because my daughter didn't really continue to love broccoli. Test scores are a lot like broccoli. We can trust them over a long period of time. Okay, in some ways they're not like broccoli, but in some ways they are. NAEP scores and all test scores, we should trust over a longer period of time. 2 years in test scores are essentially a fluctuation. Fluctuations could be random at any point. We don't know until we've got some real years of test score gains whether this is a real trend or whether this is just a blip. So in NAEP, we probably want to look at least 5 years, maybe 10 years, 20 years would be ideal. That's really what these test scores are designed to tell us. They're not designed to tell us in 2 years whether something is a meaningful, lasting, sustained trend. Finally, and this is a really important point, a really, really important point, even the most reliable valid scores like NAEP are telling us a little snapshot of the picture. What are NAEP scores really telling us? They're telling us what we want to know about what our kids know, some kids know, about math, science, and reading. They're telling us nothing about what our kids know about art, or music, or civics, or history. They're telling us nothing about the stuff we care about even more. How creative are our kids? How engaged are our kids? How are our kids using knowledge to do other things? And I'll put this in context for all of us. When we look back on our lives, how big a role do test scores play? How much did test scores mean to our parents in terms of how they judge us as people? How much did they even mean to our teachers in how they judge us as people? Not all that much. I think we should all keep in mind that even very good test scores are a very tiny slice of a picture. Let's keep that in context. Now, all of that said, test scores do tell us one other thing that's very important. Test scores are a huge reflection of income level. And gaps in test scores are a huge reflection of poverty. And this is one of the points, this is probably the key point, and the point I think education policymakers need to keep in mind, and that we're mainly not keeping in mind. Now, this is not news. I'm not here this morning to present a headline or tell you something that researchers haven't known. What I'm about to say is actually discovered in 1966, okay? So in 1966, the Department of Education found a sociologist, Dr. James Coleman, very respected guy, and they said, you know, we have this weird achievement gap problem. Black kids and white kids are not performing at all at the same levels. We want you to investigate what it is that's going on in schools, schools that serve mostly black kids versus schools that serve mostly white kids, and figure out what those schools are doing differently that is causing these huge achievement gaps. Okay, this was 50 years ago. James Coleman went in these schools and came back and said to the Department of Education, to his surprise, and as you can imagine, very much to the Department of Education's surprise, I don't think it's mostly about the schools, okay? As far as I can tell, about 2/3 of this is about what's going on outside of the schools. Specifically, it's about poverty, family poverty, community poverty, and it's about segregation. Okay, what this means is, to me, James Coleman was probably the first guy to identify what I would call opportunity gaps. Okay, and this is another very, very important point. This is where education policy should be focused. And the reason this is so important is that achievement gaps are not the problem. Achievement gaps are a symptom. Achievement gaps are the symptom of the real problem. And the real problem is disparities in opportunity that begin very, very early in children's lives, continue throughout their lives. They're very correlated along the lines of poverty and race and ethnicity. And they are what drive achievement gaps. And the reason it is so fundamentally important for us to focus on opportunity gaps is that to the extent that our policies are chasing achievement gaps, when we are chasing a symptom, let's put this in the medical context. If you go to the doctor and you tell the doctor only your symptom, and the doctor doesn't try to figure out why you have the symptom and what the underlying disease is, and he only treats your symptom, you're never going to have a cure. And that's exactly where we are in education. We are chasing a symptom and we are not at the problem. Okay, now what are these problems? Since James Coleman, we've made a lot of progress. And what the progress is that we've made is researchers for decades have started to unpack what exactly those opportunity gaps are. And I want to spend now about 5 minutes explaining what those big opportunity gaps are and how they compound over time. Okay, first of all, opportunity gaps start very, very early in a child's life, at birth. Okay, anyone who's had a kid? anyone who's been around a kid, anyone who's been a kindergarten teacher can tell you with no hesitation that things that happen in kids' lives early make a huge difference. Kids are really sponges, they absorb everything. What's going on in their lives makes a huge difference, okay? What kind of childcare they have, what kind of early experiences they have, whether they got read to at night, whether they then went to a museum or a zoo so that what they got read to at night was put in context, okay? Whether they learned that letters and numbers are connected to what they read in books. When kids get all those things and they get to kindergarten, they are raring and ready to go. Okay, if you're a kindergarten teacher though, and you've been in the classroom, you know that the gaps are enormous. Okay, some of your kids are right there. They've had all those things and they're ready to go. Another group of kids whose parents couldn't afford quality childcare, whose parents worked night shifts and weren't there to reach them, whose parents didn't take them to the museums and zoos that put this stuff in those books in context, they get to kindergarten not knowing any of that stuff. The result of that is, by the time kids walk in the door of kindergarten, those readiness gaps are as big as 1 to 2 years. Okay, for the kids who are the disadvantaged ones, it's very hard to catch up. And as you can imagine, for a teacher, it's very hard to teach to all those kids. But that is not at all where the gaps finish. That is just where they start. Those same gaps continue to be compounded. Those same kids who arrived at kindergarten with less context, with less vocabulary, with less readiness, were also less likely to be immunized. They're also less likely to have a pediatrician. They're also less likely to have their asthma diagnosed and under control. They're more likely to have cavities, and if they have cavities, they're less likely to be filled, because it's unlikely that they have a dentist who's going to address them. Okay, those other kids aren't going to have cavities, and if they do, they're filled, and they're not getting to school with a toothache. As they go through school, those health problems continue to compound. Those kids in that first category, when they have a cold, they go to the doctor. They get antibiotics. They don't go to the emergency room. They don't miss days and days of school. They're there. Those other kids, that turns into chronic absence for them. Okay, let's take those same two groups of kids, and we talk about opportunity gaps. What about food? That first group of kids, that lucky advantaged group of kids, they have dinner every night. They have breakfast in the morning. They go to school, they're ready, they're awake, they're aware, they're ready to go. The other group of kids, very likely not to have had a regular dinner. They're very likely not to have had breakfast, which means that they're very likely sitting there for the first 3 hours of school, not listening, but waiting for lunch so they can put something in their stomachs. Okay, so we can see, just at the end of kindergarten or first grade, how big those opportunity gaps are. Then they get really big, okay, because then we hit summer. What happens during the summer? My kids go to camp, my kids go to sports, my kids get music lessons, my kids travel, okay? They're building on and enhancing everything that they learned during the year, and they've got loads of books at home, and they're continuing to read and gain ground. That second group of kids, their parents don't have money for summer camp, they are not going to music lessons, they're very unlikely to be traveling, and they have very few books in their houses, and they lose ground. They lose so much ground, in fact, that a team of researchers at Johns Hopkins estimated that by the time those two groups of kids hit 9th grade, most of the 9th grade gap in test scores is attributable just to the summer learning differences in those elementary school years. Okay? So by the time those kids finish 5th grade, that gap is enormous, and as we just talked about, most of that gap didn't happen in the classroom. Most of that gap happened outside the classroom, okay? So this is unpacking all those opportunity gaps that James Coleman found in 1966. And then finally, on top of all of that, we have a system of funding our schools that further compacts those gaps. Because that first group of kids that had every advantage and didn't get at the bottom of those opportunity gaps, they're in the schools where their parents don't have to pay as high property tax, where they're likely to have smaller classes, they're likely to be able to pay their teachers more and have more resources. So those gaps are then further compounded during the school year. Let's talk about what that means in Tennessee, okay? Because the opportunity gaps in Tennessee are pretty substantial. In Tennessee, the latest statistics shows that 1 in 4 kids is growing up in poverty. Okay, those are kids who have severe opportunity gaps, whose parents are having to make choices every single day among the basics, okay? We can't do rent and food and clothing and transportation and good education. One of those is gonna have to trade off. Another whole group just as big as that group is below 200% poverty. They're what we call officially low income, but if we updated our poverty line, that's probably where we'd actually put the poverty line. That means that fully 1 in every 2 kids in this entire state is living in a household in which parents are making serious choices among things that we would consider fundamental basics in order for kids to be ready to get to school and ready to learn. Now, what are the implications of this for policy? The implications for this for policy are very, very substantial. Okay, now I want to be really clear because I'm a researcher and I have a doctor in front of my name and all that stuff. This is a rough chart, okay? I think it helps us. It would be helpful to think of achievement. Let's think of achievement for a moment as a pie. Okay, I know it's a weird thought, but before I thought of, things I know as broccoli, so I'm sure you can all think of this as a pie. Okay, this pie represents 100% of the things that we could do in policy to improve education. We could also think of it as the pie with the potential to close achievement gaps. Okay, there are 3 pieces of this pie. The big blue piece of this pie is the stuff that James Coleman identified. It's the out-of-school factors. It's more than half, okay? The green part of the pie is what researchers like to call unknown factors. It means we don't know what they are, okay? We just don't know. The little red chunk of the pie, which is as big as the green one, okay, 20% are the in-school factors, okay? That's the stuff that we can improve within schools that helps close achievement gaps, okay? That also represents the piece of the pie that in an ideal world, if Race to the Top were perfectly structured and ideally implemented, and we have all the resources we need all the time and everything else, that's how much of that achievement gap pie we could close. Okay, that's a really important statement, because I don't know if any of you read the application that Tennessee sent in for Race to the Top, but I did, and I read all of them. Okay, and Tennessee asserted that it was going to use that little red chunk to close that whole thing. Okay, and as we just talked about, that actually would not be possible. Okay, now I want to talk a little bit about what has happened in Tennessee under Race to the Top before I talk to you all. Oh, and I should have said this at the beginning. A lot of my family's from New York, and I'm from DC, so I know that I talk really fast, and I'm putting a lot of stuff out there. So please, I should have said at the beginning, you should feel free to interrupt me at any point if you want to. It's a little late in the game here. Let me give a little context for Race to the Top. My organization spent a year exploring what was going on in Race to the Top. And what I mean by that is, we knew there was this big policy mismatch, but we wanted to also know what was going on at the district and school level with respect to implementation. We want to know what's happening on the ground. We looked through all the Federal Department of Education reports. We looked through State Department of Education reports like you're in Tennessee. We looked through news articles. We looked through every report we could find. And then we interviewed about 24 people in 3 states, including Tennessee. And I have to say that what we found was not pretty, okay? It certainly was not the ideal kind of little red 20% chunk that we see there. And I want to highlight a couple of the things that we found. Okay, we found, first of all, teacher and principal morale was very low. Okay, and I'm talking about Tennessee specifically. Teachers didn't feel heard, they didn't feel supported. Principals felt overburdened and also not heard or supported. There was a lot of student stress. Students felt like they were getting tested to death. Parents reported being very unhappy at how much their students were being tested. We heard one teacher tell the mother of a 3rd grader, who was an honors student, that 30 days per year spent on testing was about average. Okay, for an 8-year-old. All the 8-year-olds were spending 30 days a year getting tested, and that did not include the time they were spending preparing for those tests. Okay, I want us to all take in what that means in terms of school time. Okay, teachers, on the whole, while some teachers were getting good feedback, many teachers were not getting good feedback. They did not feel that the test scores were being used to guide them. They did not feel that they were being used to help them with professional development. And this is a very, very important point. Tennessee did not seem to be using its Race to the Top money or resources to develop a strong teacher corps. Okay, when we talk about that 20% of that pie, certainly a big chunk of it, up to half of it, is about developing a strong teacher corps. A strong teacher corps means experienced teachers, qualified teachers, credentialed teachers, teachers who have what they need to teach, especially given those opportunity gaps we're talking here. That is not where Tennessee has put its money. Okay, in a state in which it's been asserted that there isn't enough money to pay teachers who were already, by the way, 45 out of 50, okay, before we went to Race to the Top in terms of where they were on the teacher pay scale, and have since dropped. In that state where there wasn't money for them, this state has spent record amounts of money on recruiting people who are going to leave after 2 years and who didn't teach before they got here. Okay, and this is not a blanket critique of Teach for America, okay, but this is to state 2 very important points. One is, this is not the way to develop a strong, consistent teacher corps or the collaborative teams that we know work well in schools to make education improved. Second of all, as far as we could tell, Tennessee was paying more than any other state for recruiting. to get Teach for America, and as far as I can tell, Nashville is at the top of that list. Okay, that's where some of that money was going. Where is other money going really heavily? This probably won't surprise you, given what I just said about 30 days a year of testing. Pearson. In the first 3 years of Race to the Top implementation in Tennessee, the state's payments to the Pearson testing company alone tripled test preparation and for all those materials. Okay, none of this suggests that the funding that Tennessee has gotten for Race to the Top is going the way it should be to develop the education system that Tennessee needs and deserves. Okay. Let me finish out by saying what I think Tennessee does need and deserve and where it could go that would be different. The biggie is Tennessee and all the states doing Race to the Top need to be taking a longer term view. Okay, as we started out saying, James Coleman found this problem 50 years ago. We are not digging our way out of this problem in 4 years, and to assert that we can, frankly, is ridiculous and insulting. Okay, this is a big, deep-seated, complex problem, and it requires big, deep-seated, complex, forward thinking with a long-term set of strategies. Second of all, we need to target the disease itself and target our cure to that and not to the symptoms. We need to be addressing poverty directly and comprehensively. Now, there are some great things that Tennessee has done that suggest that it has a way to build on this. Tennessee has been a pioneer in high-quality pre-K. Okay, but since Race to the Top, Tennessee hasn't funded a single new seat in its pre-K program. Okay, you've got at least half the kids in this state who would benefit from that pre-K program. That needs to change. Tennessee has been really great about ensuring that kids can get to a doctor when they need it. We need to build on that. That is a huge problem in a state with these kind of opportunity gaps. Basically, Tennessee needs to be shifting its focus from the standards focus to a supports focus. And I want to finish by saying, the one state that we looked at when we did Race to the Top that was doing this was Massachusetts. Okay, and Massachusetts isn't kind of winning some of this race only because it is wealthier. Okay, Massachusetts, 20 years ago, looked at what was going on in its state and said, you know what? We need higher standards, we need better education, and in order to do that, we need a 20-year plan. We need a really strategic, comprehensive approach, and before we put any of those higher standards in place, we need a great pre-K program, we need wraparound supports, we need healthcare for all our kids. If our kids, okay, here's where we are right now. Here's our kids, and here are our standards. If so far our disadvantaged kids aren't hitting these standards, the thought that we could get these kids to reach these standards just by putting the standards here doesn't make sense. We've got to raise these kids up and put a good floor, a foundation under them to get there, and that is what Massachusetts spent a long time doing before it tried to just raise standards. That is a comprehensive approach, that's a 20-year look, and that is what Tennessee is going to need to do to really get where it wants to be. I will be more than happy to talk and answer questions. Thank you.
Personal interest of mine is the TFA money and where it's spent the money, and I don't know that everybody's aware that we spend both by district and by state. Yep. The state is funds at a tune of like 9,056. There's a different rate depending on whether you're in the Achievement District or whether you're in Memphis or whether you're in Houston. Can you speak to that a little bit more? Is that typical where the state pays and
I believe, so I'll be very honest, I had no idea how TFA funding worked until I did this report, and I frankly was really shocked. I mean, I didn't have any idea about the amount of money that people paid to get TFA recruits, especially in a place where, frankly, you have teachers. I mean, it's one thing to be in a place where there's just no teachers, and so you gotta bring people in, but I was not aware of Tennessee having the general teacher shortage. It is, I think, common for the state and the district to pay separately. What's unusual about Tennessee is how much it's paying at both levels, more than any other state that we saw. And as I said, Nashville was beating everybody within Tennessee. I mean, I can look into it more. I'm really not the expert on Teach for America at all.
You talked about all the other aspects of education that aren't really considered with testing, creativity, arts, that kind of thing. And what we hear a lot is that the way that they're going to fix our achievement gap is we're going to get high quality teachers, high quality seats, whatever they want to call each time of the day. And they kind of project out that that's the only way to get kids to do better. and then we're judging the kids by those test scores that they've done better on that narrow math and English. So TFA falls into that, you know, they hire them because they get supposedly better results in a short amount of time. Do you? And
the supposedly is very important there.
Right, and we've got a merit pay plan coming down from the state, which is, you know, got mixed reviews. Are there other ways that you feel like we can improve kids' experiences, their education outcomes, without doing merit pay, without, you know, looking at a score that may or may not be based on what a teacher actually taught a kid?
I mean, I will talk about where my kids go to school. So I live in Montgomery County, Maryland, which is, you know, in some ways a lot like Massachusetts. We have a lot of resources. We have lower poverty. Like other places, though, we're growing in it. And my kids, my younger daughter is in a school that's 60 to 70% more. So certainly we've got, and probably majority non-English speaking. Montgomery County has taken a totally different approach, a lot more like Massachusetts for the past 12 years. Both to teaching curriculum and to teacher evaluation. For one thing, my superintendent is holding out. Actually, he's holding up Race the Top ones because he refuses to use test scores at all in teacher evaluations. For 10 years, Montgomery County has been building a system of peer-assisted review where the best teachers, and not meaning teachers with high test scores, but teachers who are experienced, who are qualified, and who are considered by their peers to be among the best teachers, are coaches and help other teachers get better. So what happens is every teacher is observed by their peer teachers. Those teachers provide really good feedback based on their own experiences. They provide lessons in their own classrooms that other teachers can come to, and they talk about sort of standards for teaching and experience, and it's all tailored toward improving teachers. It does get rid of the worst teachers after a couple years, but in a much more sort of consistent and agreed upon manner. And the way data are used in Montgomery County, I think, is amazing. So rather than using data to judge teachers, and this really speaks to one of the critiques that I heard in Tennessee, is not only aren't these data used appropriately, not only are they a terrible judge of teachers, but we can't even use them because, you know, they come in August and our kids are gone by then, and we have one snapshot, and what are we supposed to do with this? In Montgomery County, our teachers use formative data all the time. They look at what goes on in a classroom. They literally compile this data notebook, which is a portfolio throughout the year. At the end of every week, they look through the whole class's portfolio. They use it to reconfigure the kids in lessons for the next week, to decide who goes in which reading group, to figure out which math lessons they should repeat. And then at every 2 or 3 months, it comes home to us. And so we review it, and we know what's going on. And we can help, and we provide feedback to the teacher, and our kids provide feedback to their teacher. What they loved, what they saw, what they want to do differently. It's kind of an amazing system. And then talk about accountability. This notebook goes with my kids throughout their whole school career. So when my daughter gets to 4th grade, her teacher knows what was done in reading, what worked, what didn't work with her, what her parents are doing, and the whole shebang. To me, that's very impressive, but you're asking if there's another way to do this. I would say that's another way to do this. And Montgomery County is attracting some of the best teachers, has extremely low turnover. You know, it works. What to say? It works.
Considering the effect of extracurricular and summer activities, have you looked at all at what moving to a year-round schedule might do to the achievement gap, as opposed to, you know, having summers off now?
I haven't looked specifically at moving to a year-round schedule, but given all the evidence of summer learning loss, it makes so much sense on so many levels. For one thing, I think even for parents like me who can afford summer camp, it's stressful. I mean, I'm actually in the middle of trying to figure out summer camp now, and it's a nightmare. And I'm trying to imagine what it would be like if I didn't have the resources I had and didn't have the options I had. So first of all, from a logistical perspective, it makes sense. In terms of stemming summer learning loss, it would be huge. I mean, those same Hopkins researchers who estimated that enormous cumulative impact just from kindergarten to 5th grade also found that kids were learning, those rich kids and the poorest kids were learning at almost the same exact rate during the school year. So that 9 to 3 thing from September to June was totally working for everyone, which suggests it would be great. I guess one thing I would be wary of, given where we're going sometimes with extended learning time, is again making sure that we're really giving all kids the same options. One thing that I'm very concerned about where we're going in education policy is there's far too much use of the term "those kids." Okay, and I am always, it kind of raises red flags for me whenever I hear the term "those kids." Okay, the reality is all kids need the same things, all kids benefit from the same things. The problem is they're not getting the same things. Okay, so it's not that poor kids need more drilling or more boring time in school or more intensity of math and science and reading. What they need is the same stuff that a lot of our kids are getting. Okay, they need trips to museums. They need kind of all kinds of experiences that broaden the world for them. And they just need more of it because they're getting less of it in other contexts. So I would want to build into the school day a lot of what's going on now with after school as well. School has become so rote and so drill-based and all of that, especially for poor kids. At least they could do chess and robotics for an hour after school. Okay, that sucks. That is not what we should be accepting for regular school. None of us would accept that for our kids. We're not okay with that. With saying, okay, our kids are bored just here 6 hours, but at least they can go and play basketball or do something fun. No, all of those interactive hands-on things should be happening all day, and they should be happening all year. And school, year-round school would be a way to do it. Making sure we have great summer experiences would be a way to do it. There are many, many strategies to do it. I just want to make sure it happens in the right way.
You talked about, or you criticized Tennessee, the Department of Education for...
I was just going to say I did not criticize Tennessee.
Oh, I caught myself. You criticized our Department of Education for spending a large portion of our Race to the Top money on one company, Pearson. Have there been any states that have used Race to the Top money well? Is there somebody we could look to that's done a better job with this money that they've received? I know Delaware got some Race to the Top money. I mean, has there been a good use?
So there have been good uses, and I don't want to fixate only on Massachusetts, so I'll get back to Massachusetts in a minute, which overall has used Race to the Top, I think, well. Now, to be really clear, in depth, so we looked across states in terms of what's going on broadly. In terms of in-depth looking at states, we really looked at Ohio, Tennessee, and Delaware. We did case studies for Ohio and Tennessee. And I should say, for anyone who's interested, I have copies of the case study of Tennessee here, and I have copies of this big, if you want to see sort of written down with full sources, all the opportunity gap stuff I talked about and a lot more, and you love reading 20 pages of academic stuff, come talk to me. I have copies. In terms of, there have been some good uses of Race to the Top money everywhere. Actually, okay, I didn't find some good ones in Tennessee yet. I'm sure there are some. There are a couple districts that we looked at in Ohio, and these districts tend to have something in common, by the way, and they have something in common with Massachusetts, and that is that they were relatively well off. They weren't super stressed going into the Race to the Top, where they didn't have to kind of be plugging these huge holes in existing resources or trying to fill space with very little resources. They tended to be relatively well-off districts that could capitalize on what they were already doing well and target the money really strategically. So a district, for example, in Ohio, that was very interesting, what it did was it took Race to the Top money, it hired long-term, high-quality substitutes for about half the year. It pulled out its very best, strongest, most qualified teachers to develop a new curriculum and to develop student learning objectives and to teach teachers how to use data better in teams to create the right objectives and figure out how to measure them so the schools could sort of be on board around a common set of objectives that were broad and enriching and use them. So that was one that I thought was very interesting, and the teachers reported this was great, we were consulted, we were at the helm from the beginning, we trusted it because you pulled the teachers who we all look to for advice anyway to be shaping what we're doing, and they then guided all of us to figure out how we can do better at the stuff we already know we need to do well, like collaboration, like using data to guide instruction and all of that. And I will tell you that the person I talked to in that district said the one thing she hated about Race to the Top, the thing she hated the most was value added, and she minimized it to the point she could in terms of legal possibilities. Massachusetts has used Race to the Top money fantastically, and my argument is that Massachusetts was poised to do it. By the time Massachusetts got its Race to the Top money, it had topped, it had raced. I mean, it had spent 20 years investing huge sums. It had a pilot program, pre-K program to move toward universal. I mean, coined Romney Care, so it was definitely doing healthcare right. It was doing a lot of other things right and has a lot of money. And it was putting that money into education all the way from pre-K through college. But the other thing is Massachusetts looked and said, look, how do we need to target this money? We've done a great job. We've put the scaffolding foundations in place. We've raised our standards. We're doing all that. We still have big gaps. Why do we have gaps? We have gaps because in the districts where kids are the poorest, where poverty and racial minority status is concentrated, our teachers need more supports and our schools need more supports. And that's where we need to, they didn't hire any TFA people. What they did is they said, we've got these fantastic teachers because they are going to need to be even better to meet these challenges. So what do we need here? We've got a lot of special education kids. Let's make sure tons of our teachers are special education certified. Let's give them money, resources, and time to do that. We have English language learner kids, like the challenge that Massachusetts took to its Race to the Top money. And frankly, Massachusetts saw fewer hurdles than anyone else we knew. And one of the people I was able to talk to was one of the co-chairs of my campaign, who was the superintendent in Boston for 11 of those years that they were gearing up. And so the background on why this seemed to be working better in Massachusetts.
The organization Students Funds has been pouring a lot of money right students.
Yes, it has. And your commissioner is the ex-husband, no?
Brian. And they have their own report cards.
They certainly do.
Curious, they list Massachusetts, they give them a low grade.
I noticed that too.
And I was wondering if you had any comment on how their report card system works. And
I actually, it's funny you should say that. I was actually going to mention that during my remarks. So one thing, so I talked about this policy mismatch. And I think this policy mismatch, again, sort of like the poverty matters, I am certainly not the first person or the only person to be saying that. A lot of way smarter, more informed people from before me have been talking about this. One of the things I thought, funny may not be the right word, but one of the indicators of what a bad mismatch this is, I think, can be seen in these students' first report cards, right? So Michelle Reed and her group are going around grading states, how closely they hew to her view of policy. But not essentially, I mean, that's all it is. It's, this is what I think policy should be. I love it, and if you don't like it, I'm going to give you a D. I mean, I think that's actually a pretty fair way to characterize it. It has nothing to do with evidence. And in fact, I should just say, sort of talking about what BD has done earlier in the year, the first report we did was 3 cities that pioneered essentially Race to the Top, Washington, D.C., New York, and Chicago. And we were very curious because they had been doing this for a while before Race to the Top, and we said, wow, we wonder what happened there. And it wasn't good either. It was really ugly. DC was sort of those uglies, it was the ugliest. Okay, so Michelle Reed has taken this policy agenda that she's proclaiming did great things in DC, when what it, in fact, it was give DC the lowest NAEP score gains of any big urban high poverty city in the country, and widen already record achievement gaps, and apply it to all these states she's going to, like Tennessee. Okay. Meanwhile, we have a great pre-K program in DC that you'll never hear about because she doesn't mention it. Okay, so I guess the best thing I can say is, are there really people? Okay, how many policymakers look to Massachusetts and say, wow, I certainly don't want my state to look like that in education. What I really want my state to look like is Florida, whatever she's giving an A+ or B+ to, which are states that have very low achievement, very low investment in schools, unhappy teachers, and enormous achievement gaps. The policymaker to take that seriously. And it commented in its own commentary that it found it very odd or hard to understand why, so it has these rankings based on various things, and it put out its achievement rankings, and it has its top 10, and it said, we have to admit, of the top 10, 5 of them are states that completely, in other words, questions for what makes achievement happen bear no resemblance to states that are actually happening. So I'm just, they said themselves. Anyway.
So charter schools have been contentious here in Tennessee. What data researchers helping with NAEP scores? Like, is there data that those charter schools are helping close that opportunity gap, that achievement gap? They've been around for a long time. Is there some data that shows us that they work in those quantified?
So again, I've got a little bit more on charter schools in this backgrounder piece. And I don't want to spend, I didn't spend time in here on charter schools because I think, frankly, charter schools are a distraction. Okay, they're not bad and they're not good. They're not helping the cause, and they're not really, in general, hurting the cause. And what I mean by that is, given what we've seen about the pie and opportunity gaps, Charter schools are a marginal issue. It's a lot, frankly, like the issue of teachers' unions. It's where all the oxygen in the policy room is going, and sucking the oxygen out of what actually matters. Okay, so we've got in Tennessee a lot of students who are growing up in poverty. We have a lot of students who are growing up English language learners. We have a lot of students who are coming to school not having been screened for delays, who have delays. Okay, the person who runs that school doesn't make a difference. That kid doesn't go to a school with someone running the school and suddenly become proficient in English. They don't suddenly have breakfast. They don't suddenly have healthcare. Those things don't change because of a charter school. Okay, charter schools really are a lot like other schools. They vary. Okay, so to say, I'm also hesitant about this because it's sort of like judging any huge thing. Okay, but I'll provide a snapshot of the evidence. Okay, I think the best comprehensive evidence comes from an organization called CREDO, which it's C-R-E-D-O. It's out of Stanford University, and they do a big comprehensive study, a meta-analysis, if you will, of charter schools. Okay, the most recent data, and frankly, they like charter schools. Okay, so they will want to find pretty good stuff to say about charter schools on balance. And what they said in their most recent report was looking at something like 70 or 80% of all the charter schools across this country in 16 states, they're a wash. Okay, now they'll say it's good because I think in reading, on average, with all these charter schools, kids gain like the equivalent of 7 days of learning and reading. Okay, but they also lost 7 days of learning in math. Okay, I would think that's fair to call that a wash. Now, it's an improvement on their scores from 2009 when twice as many kids were doing worse in charter schools than in comparable public schools. Now, just like any other schools, they vary enormously across states. So your authorizer makes a big difference. The state turns out to be the biggest factor. Okay, so there are better charter schools. New York City and Washington, D.C. probably have some of the better ones. Ohio and Pennsylvania have some of the worst ones. Obviously, if you authorize better ones, they'll be better. If you keep track of them, they're better. If you don't do what Ohio does and let them totally scam people and move from place to place and shut down overnight and throw kids by the thousands into public schools, they'll do better. Okay, but on average, they're not a problem and they're not a panacea. The big thing that we have found is they do really disrupt public school systems. So to the extent that you've got public school systems, especially in distressed urban areas or in very poor rural areas that are already struggling, if you tack on a struggle to that, and you're not getting much bang out of those charter schools, it's hard to figure out why that makes a lot of sense. It's very hard to understand why it makes so much sense to, again, use so much of our minimal oxygen on that. They're just not a big factor.
I did want to ask one more question. Sorry to double dip, and this leads right into it. I was wondering if you could speak a little bit on the Achievement District here in Tennessee. One of the things as we talk about charters that concerns me a little bit is as we start to try to tackle this opportunity gap, we have a tendency to create a different curriculum or plan of attack.
Are you talking about those kids?
Those kids I'm talking about.
Just saying.
We tend to institute things like longer days, eye tracking, stricter discipline.
Okay.
Are we in section creating two tracks that will eventually carry into society? Does that make any sense what I'm asking?
It makes a lot of sense what you're asking, and it's frankly something that's been really disturbing me. So achievement districts. I mean, we learned several things about achievement districts in Tennessee. Yes, I think there is a those kids problem going on. Now, does it make sense to figure out where kids are struggling, which schools are struggling, to effectively reach kids and support them in ways that they need? Absolutely. We absolutely need to be doing that. First of all, can we do it well by test scores? Absolutely not. There's no way, because we just talked about what are test scores measuring? They're correlated with income, okay? So all we're doing is knowing which schools are serving poor kids. We didn't need test scores to tell us that. We know which schools are serving poor kids. We just look at which schools are serving poor kids. No coincidence, huge, very, very high correlation between those schools. Now, some of those schools are serving poor kids really well, okay? And some of those schools are probably doing a crummy job. Now, the same thing is true of rich kids, okay? Let's be very fair. Kids who are doing well, coming to school prepared, eating breakfast, reading at home, going to museums, they're probably going to do pretty well in school, almost irrespective of how much a school contributes. It's really, really hard, actually impossible for us to tell how much a school is contributing based on test scores. I mean, not to be awful about it, my kids are going to have really good test scores. They happen to have great teachers. Even they do not believe that their teachers are mostly to blame or credit for their test scores, and that's the reality. Now, going to this whole eye contact, whatever thing, if we're targeting kids appropriately, we should be doing this with the goal of closing opportunity gaps. Now, I don't think that anyone seriously as a parent believes that telling kids not to talk, not to ask questions, to tell them that the best thing to do for them is give them worksheets 4 hours a day so that they can solve basic arithmetic problems, okay, and teaching them over and over how to write a sentence is preparing them to compete with other kids. Okay, I'm sorry, but that is ludicrous and frankly, just insulting. Okay, and if you're a parent, you should feel it's insulting. It is. One of the things that we looked at in our study was looking at what's going on in some of the achievement districts. Okay, there was one school where parents are reporting that their 6 and 7-year-old kids are having accidents in the classroom because they can't go to the bathroom. Okay, that's disgusting. Okay, that should never be happening. And frankly, if I were a parent, I would be out there like screaming my head off. Okay, that's horrible. Okay, there are schools, including some that apparently are taking over and other achievement school districts that are very clearly pushing out kids before the end of the year tests because they don't want those kids' test scores marring their test scores. Okay, achievement districts may or may not work. Okay, but making sure the policy works for them has got to be focused on all kids having the same things and not on some kids having less, worse, and narrower than other kids. Okay, and boot camp is just, I'm sorry, not appropriate for 5 or 6-year-olds, no matter what. Boot camp isn't even appropriate for me.
Yes, thank you so very much. Testing. All kids are not good test takers.
Yeah, no kidding. My husband
All
is a crappy
adults
test
are
taker.
not good
I know.
test takers.
My husband and I have this conversation all the time.
But we seem to push the issue, which really we're overlooking poverty where it begins. Secondly, we have forgotten music and arts. We never mention how a child can advance through music and art. And we seem to give them the smallest slice of the pie when it comes to funds. I don't know how much research you've done on this, but can you speak to how the arts affect learning?
So this is not my area of expertise at all, and I'm going to touch on this briefly. There is a lot of research out there, and I think the research is pretty clear. And again, I'm going to go to those kids and our kids, or whatever you want to call it.
And most of those kids
You will
look
never
like me.
hear a parent of a child who's getting art, who's getting music, who's getting this stuff as a matter of course, suggest that it doesn't matter. Okay, no one is suggesting. Okay, if it matters for some kids, for sure it matters for all kids. Okay, any of us who've been around a kid, forget being around a kid, any of us who've been us, we know what music does for us. Okay, it opens up all kinds of stuff. Actually, I was in my hotel lobby this morning listening to awesome country music and thinking just what it does for me, how much I like Nashville. Okay, so it opens up a lot of stuff for us. It opens up creativity. We know there's all kinds of links between music especially and math ability, okay, and science thinking, all kinds of things. I have a daughter who's super musical, okay, and I'll be honest, one reason that I kind of waited on her for a while is I wanted her to have a pre-K year that was full of more music and more art and more hands-on stuff. That's what kids need, and the younger they are, I think, the more they need it. So that is huge, and we are really neglecting that. One of the things that we've seen in Race to the Top and with these reforms, and this is inevitable. Again, I think for the Department of Education or State Department to suggest that this isn't happening is just it's ludicrous. Okay, there's no way to put this kind of pressure on test scores in math and reading and not lose other subjects. You can't. You cannot grade a teacher based solely on how those test scores come out and expect that teacher to maintain the importance of other things. It's insane. It would be like if I were judged in my job on those things and then said, well, you know what? I'm going to ignore it. I know that I'm going to fail and they're going to fire me. But I'm going to do music anyway. No one in their right mind would do that. It just doesn't make sense. Okay, so it just, unless we emphasize those things, unless we recognize their importance, I might even speak to private schools on this one. Okay, we talk about why private schools do well. Some of the best private schools, okay, the ones where, frankly, President Obama sends his kids, the ones where my friends who have all the means in the world send their kids, why do they send them there? Not because they get great scores, okay, because they spend a lot of time on art, they spend a lot of time on music, they spend a lot of time on hands-on science experiments, because they put their hands in dirt, okay? And they, do cool stuff like seeding oyster beds, okay? That speaks volumes, okay? Those are the parents who have any choices they want. Those are the choices they make. Clearly, they know what impact those choices have.
So I would take it that you would think that teachers' ability to renew their license based on student test scores is not a good idea.
Not that you just, no, I really, and I do want to say, of all the things I've talked about, and really there's reams of evidence on every single thing I talked about, if you really want to talk about an area where the evidence base on value added, and I'm sorry, I know this probably comes across as very insulting in a state that gave birth to this really mediocre bad idea and project. It sucks. Like, it doesn't work. It can't work, okay? The assumptions that are built into value added are so problematic. One piece of a note of how badly this works, go to 6 states with 6 different models, okay, regression models, the equations that you plug this data into to get a value added score, take the same kids, the same subjects, the same teachers, and you will have teachers all the hell over the map when it comes to their value-added scores, okay? That cannot be meaningful information if it is so contingent on not only how we use it, but how we use it by people who won't even tell the rest of us how we use it. Okay, so we're taking that same teacher and that same stuff and just plugging it into a different equation, and all of a sudden she went from highly effective to junk. Okay, I mean, I'm sorry, that's junk.
2 things.
This is the last question.
One is, what about the lack of free play and outside and fresh air that children are no longer getting during their school day, even for short periods of time? And the other that I hear from teachers is that the school system will come up with a plan that they think is going to work, and the teachers themselves will think, well, this might really work. But they only try it for a year. They don't give it a chance to really, to see if it really works. So they switch to something else. So I don't know exactly what that question is, but
okay, I'll interpret your question.
Okay.
Why would we think that digging ourselves out of a 50 or 100-year achievement gap problem could happen in 6 months? And the answer is I have no idea. That doesn't make, look, the fundamental problem we first encountered when we were talking to people about race to the top was this timeline is insane. Okay, the timeline to put together proposals was insane, the timeline to pass legislation was insane, the timeline to try to put it in place was insane, and if you read the Tennessee Race to the Top, it's basically page by page a document of the insanity that has happened as a result of this. In terms of free time, I don't think I've told anyone in this room what happens when our kids do not get time outside. Okay, I have 2 kids. One of them, when my younger daughter is a total athlete, I don't know where it came from. If she does not get her soccer time, like, I can't even put a snack in her mouth, let alone sit her in front of something, okay? I can barely get her home to get her sedated. My older daughter, who isn't athletic at all, if she doesn't have recess, I have to talk to our other 3 friends whose kids are similarly athletic to discuss what we are going to do with our bouncing off the wall 9-year-olds, okay? We can't even learn that way. I can't sit at a computer for more than an hour or 2 without getting up to go around and chat. Okay, these are kids. Kids need to move. We learn better by moving. My kids' smartest teachers did yoga in between subjects. They did stretching. They did all kinds of stuff in the classroom because they knew that this is what enabled kids to learn. Okay, they cut recess and my kids come home and it's a disaster. So, I mean, we don't need research to tell us this stuff. I mean, this is so fundamentally common sense. It's easy. So, yeah.
That's it. We're going to take questions, but I really appreciate it.